Lyra sat in the corner booth of the small cafe and watched the evening crowd through the window. Her violet eyes scanned each face with the practiced awareness of a soldier who had seen too much war. 15 years had passed since the Convergence War ended, but she still could not shake the habits that kept her alive. The coffee in front of her had gone cold an hour ago. She had not touched it. Katie, her human friend, had insisted on this blind date with an enthusiasm that Lyra found both touching and exhausting. Lyra had agreed only to stop the constant pestering. Now she regretted that decision deeply. Her true nature as a Sylvari warrior remained hidden beneath carefully maintained illusions. Humans called her kind elves in their stories, but the reality was far more complex. The Sylvari were dimensional guardians and warriors who had fought beside humanity when the Nexari Empire threatened to destroy Earth. Most humans never knew the full truth about that war. They remembered explosions and alien ships and the sudden peace that followed. They did not know about the quantum cores, or the dimensional rifts, or the price that was paid. Lyra preferred it that way. On the rooftop across the street, her bonded dragon Ember waited in camouflaged form. To any casual observer, the creature appeared as nothing more than a large red bird perched among the building vents. But Lyra could feel Ember through their bond. The dragon was restless and suspicious of this meeting. Lyra shared that suspicion. The door chimed and a man entered. He was tall with dark hair that showed hints of gray at the temples. His face carried the kind of weathered look that came from years of stress, rather than age. When his eyes swept the cafe, Lyra recognized something in them immediately. This man had seen combat. Real combat. Not the sanitized training exercises that peacetime soldiers experienced, but the kind of desperate fighting that changed a person forever. Daniel Clark made his way to her table after Katie pointed him out from where she stood by the counter. He moved with a slight limp that he tried to hide, an old injury that never quite healed properly. Lyra had dozens of those herself. He sat down across from her and attempted a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. The conversation that followed was awkward and stilted. Neither of them wanted to be there. Both were doing this to satisfy a well-meaning friend. Lyra found herself studying his hands. They were the hands of someone who built things. An engineer, Katie had said, but there were scars on his knuckles and a faint mark on his wrist that looked like a plasma burn. Before either of them could find an excuse to leave, the cafe door burst open again. A young girl rushed inside with Katie following close behind. The child was perhaps 8 years old, with dark curls and bright, curious eyes. She wore a school uniform and carried a backpack covered in drawings of dragons. The girl froze when she saw Lyra. Her eyes went impossibly wide, and her mouth opened in shock. She grabbed her father by the sleeve and pulled urgently. The words she spoke made Lyra go very still. The girl said that Lyra was the silver warrior from the stories, the one with the dragon who saved people during the war. Daniel went pale. All the blood seemed to drain from his face in an instant. His hand moved instinctively to his side, where Lyra knew soldiers often kept sidearms. She recognized the gesture. Her own hand had already shifted closer to the concealed plasma blade at her hip. The casual pretense of a normal date evaporated like morning fog. These two knew each other, or rather, they had known each other once in another life during a war that was supposed to be over. The memories came flooding back unbidden. Phoenix Station, the orbital defense platform that humanity had built as their last line of defense against the Nexari invasion. Lyra had been part of the assault team sent to evacuate the wounded before the station fell. She remembered the corridors filled with smoke and the screaming of injured soldiers. She remembered the Nexari shock troops that had breached the medical bay, and she remembered the medic with desperate eyes who had refused to abandon his patients even as death closed in around them. Daniel. His name rose from the depths of memory. She had not known it then. He had been just another human soldier trying to survive. But she had seen his courage, the way he shielded wounded men with his own body, the way he kept working even as plasma fire scorched the walls around him. Lyra and Ember had held that corridor alone for 20 minutes. 20 minutes of brutal close combat against Nexari, warriors bred for killing. Her silver armor had been scorched black by the end Ember had taken 3 plasma bolts that would have killed a lesser dragon. But they had held 217 soldiers evacuated safely because they held Daniel had been among them. Now he sat across from her in a quiet cafe 15 years later. His daughter between them like a bridge across time. The bog girl named Megan stared at Lyra with wonder and recognition. Children saw things that adults learned to ignore. The slight shimmer around Lyra that marked her concealment spell. The way her eyes reflected light at odd angles, the ancient quality that no amount of human disguise could completely hide. Katie stood frozen by the door. She looked between Lyra and Daniel with an expression that was not quite surprise, more like confirmation of a suspicion. Before anyone could speak, the lights in the cafe flickered once, twice, then steady again. But Lyra felt Ember's alarm through their bond, a warning that only she could hear. The dragon had sensed something wrong, something that did not belong in this reality. Outside the window, the evening air began to shimmer with the telltale distortion of a dimensional rift. Small ones, barely noticeable to human eyes. But Lyra had spent decades learning to spot such things. The Nexari were probing Earth's defenses again. After 15 years of silence, they had returned. Daniel saw the change in her expression. He followed her gaze to the window, and his training kicked in. He recognized the signs, even if he did not fully understand them. Megan grabbed her father's hand and pressed close to his side. The girl was afraid, but trying to be brave. Lyra made a decision in that moment. The life she had built here as a hidden refugee was over. The war she thought she had left behind had found her again. She could run and try to maintain her cover, or she could fight. Daniel spoke. Then his voice was quiet but steady, despite the tension radiating through him. He said he never got to properly thank her for Phoenix Station. He said he owed her his life and the lives of his men. He said if something was coming, he wanted to help. Lyra looked at this man who had survived hell and built a peaceful life afterward. She looked at his daughter who saw through disguises with innocent clarity. She looked at Katie who stood by the door with an expression that suggested she knew far more than she had admitted. The shimmer outside grew stronger. Ember's presence in her mind became more urgent. Time was running out. Lyra stood and let a fraction of her true nature show. Just enough that the humans around her would understand what they faced. Her eyes blazed with violet light. The air around her hands crackled with silver energy. Katie moved. Then she pulled out a badge that identified her as former military intelligence. She admitted she had known who Lyra was all along. The blind date was not a coincidence. Katie had been tracking unusual dimensional readings for weeks. She needed to bring Lyra out of hiding because something was definitely coming, and humanity needed its guardians again. Megan reached out and touched Lyra's hand. The moment their skin made contact, a surge of energy passed between them. Silver light exploded from the point of contact. The girl gasped and pulled back, but it was too late. The energy had revealed something impossible. Megan was not fully human. She carried Silveri blood. The genetic markers were unmistakable. Only a hybrid could channel dimensional energy like that. Daniel stared at his daughter in shock. He had not known. How could he not have known? Lyra understood immediately. She accessed the Silveri database through her neural link. The name Holly Patterson appeared in the records. Daniel's late wife, a deep-cover Silveri operative who had died when Megan was 2 years old. Not in an accident, as the official reports claimed, but assassinated because she discovered that Nexari remnants had never left Earth. They had been hiding, waiting, planning. And now they were making their move. Outside the window, 3 figures materialized from the dimensional shimmer. Nexari hunters in full combat armor. They had tracked Lyra's energy signature when she revealed herself. They were here to eliminate her before she could warn others. The cafe erupted into chaos as civilians realized something was wrong. Daniel pulled Megan behind him. Katie drew a weapon from beneath her jacket, and Lyra stepped forward to face the enemy she thought she had escaped. But this time, she was not alone. This time she had something worth protecting beyond orders and duty. The war was beginning again, and everything had changed. The Nexari hunters moved with predatory grace through the cafe entrance. Their armor absorbed light and made them appear as living shadows. Lyra did not wait for them to attack. She threw herself forward, and her silver blade materialized in her hand from dimensional storage. The first hunter raised its plasma rifle, but she was already inside its guard. Her blade found the weak point beneath its helmet, and the creature fell. The second hunter fired. Katie shoved Daniel and Megan behind the counter as plasma bolts tore through tables and chairs. Coffee machines exploded in bursts of steam and sparks. Civilians screamed and ran for the back exit. Lyra deflected the third shot with her blade, and the energy splashed harmlessly against the ceiling. From the rooftop across the street, Ember roared. The sound shattered windows and made the entire building shake. Her camouflage dropped away, and her full form became visible. 30 feet of crimson scales and ancient fury. The dragon launched herself from the roof and crashed through what remained of the cafe front. Her claws raked across the second hunter and tore its armor like paper. The third hunter tried to retreat, but Ember caught it in her jaws. One bite, and it was over. The fight lasted less than 30 seconds. Lyra stood among the wreckage breathing hard. Her human disguise was completely gone now. Her true form showed through silver armor that looked grown rather than forged, skin that carried a faint luminescence, hair that moved as if touched by an invisible wind. She was beautiful and terrible and utterly inhuman. Daniel stared at her. From behind the counter, his daughter pressed against his chest. But Megan was not afraid. The girl looked at Lyra with wonder. Katie holstered her weapon and pulled out a communicator. She started calling in backup and giving coordinates. Lyra moved to Daniel and knelt down to meet his eyes. She told him they needed to leave immediately. More hunters would come. The Nexari never sent just 3 when they could send 30. Daniel nodded slowly. He was processing too much too quickly, but his military training kept him focused. He asked where they should go. Katie answered. She said there was a safe house 20 miles outside the city, an old military complex that had been decommissioned after the war. Except it had not really been decommissioned, it had been converted into a hidden base for the Silvari who stayed on Earth. Lyra helped Daniel to his feet. Megan clung to her father but kept watching Ember with fascination. The dragon lowered her massive head and studied the child. Recognition passed between them. Ember could sense the Silvari blood in Megan. The dragon made a soft, rumbling sound, almost like a purr. Megan reached out tentatively and touched Ember's snout. Silver light flickered again at the contact. The dragon bond was trying to form. Lyra pulled the girl back gently. She explained that bonding was not something to rush into. It was a lifelong commitment between dragon and rider. Megan nodded, but her eyes never left Ember. They left through the back exit and piled into Katie's car. Ember took to the sky and followed from above. The drive was tense and silent. Daniel finally spoke after 10 minutes. He asked about Holly. He asked if his wife had really been Silvari. Lyra accessed the files again and told him what she found. Holly Patterson had been one of 50 deep-cover operatives placed among humans after the war. Her mission was to monitor for Nexari activity and to help integrate hybrid children. She had fallen in love with Daniel during her assignment. That part was not supposed to happen, but it did. Megan was born a year later. The first confirmed hybrid child from the integration program, Holly had reported the pregnancy to her commanders. They approved her continuing the mission. A hybrid child could be valuable. a bridge between two species. But Holly discovered something else during her investigation. She found evidence that Nexari agents had infiltrated human governments. They were sabotaging the hybrid program, killing operatives and their families, making it look like accidents. Holly sent her final report 3 days before she died. Then her transport crashed on a mountain road. No survivors, no witnesses. The investigation concluded it was mechanical failure. But Lyra knew better now. Holly had been murdered to silence what she knew. Daniel absorbed this information with the blank expression of someone in shock. His entire marriage had been built on a lie. His wife had been an alien spy. His daughter was not human. Everything he thought he knew was false. Megan spoke up then. She said she remembered her mother. Not much because she had been so young, but she remembered silver light and warm hands. She remembered feeling safe. Daniel looked at his daughter and some of the tension left his shoulders. Lie or not mission or not, Holly had loved them. That much was real. They reached the safe house as the sun set. It looked like an abandoned warehouse from the outside, rusted metal walls and broken windows. But when Katie drove through the gate, an illusion fell away. The building was pristine and heavily fortified. Defensive turrets tracked their vehicle as they approached. Sylvari warriors in combat armor stood guard at the entrance. Inside the complex was vast. Dozens of warriors moved through corridors preparing for battle. Dragons roosted in a modified hangar bay. Some slept. Others sharpened their claws on steel posts. Commander Ivy Drake met them in the central operations room. She was tall even for a Sylvari, with obsidian black armor and ice blue eyes. Her dragon Shadow Fang loomed behind her, darker and larger than Ember, ancient and deadly. Ivy looked at Lyra with a mix of relief and reproach. She said she had been trying to contact Lyra for weeks. The dimensional sensors had picked up increasing Nexari activity. They knew an attack was coming. They needed every warrior ready. Lyra defended her choice to stay hidden. She said she had done her part in the war. She deserved peace. Ivy did not argue. She just pointed to Megan. She said peace was a luxury none of them could afford anymore. Not while hybrid children were being targeted, not while Earth remained vulnerable. Daniel stepped forward. Then he said he was not a soldier anymore. He was an engineer, but he wanted to help. He asked what they were up against. Katie brought up holographic displays, satellite feeds, showing dimensional rifts opening across the planet. Small ones so far, just scouts and probe ships, but the pattern was clear. The Nexari were preparing for a full invasion. Ivy explained the enemy strategy. The Nexari Empire wanted Earth's quantum core. It was a massive dimensional anchor buried deep beneath the planet's surface. With it, they could power their empire for 1,000 years. Without it, Earth would collapse into dimensional chaos. Everything would be destroyed. Humanity, the Sylvari refugees, the hybrid children, all of it gone. Daniel studied the displays with an engineer's eye. He noticed something the others had missed. The dimensional rifts were not random. They formed a pattern, a geometric network centered on New Haven, right where the cafe attack happened. Right where the quantum core was located, the Nexari knew exactly where to strike. Someone had given them that information. A traitor, Katie went pale. She started cross-referencing intelligence reports, names and dates, security clearances and access, logs. Within minutes, she had a list of suspects, government officials, military officers, corporate executives, all of them in positions to know about the quantum core. All of them with connections to companies that had profited from post-war reconstruction. The conspiracy went deeper than anyone suspected. Megan tugged on Lyra's armor. The girl said she could feel something. A pull toward the north. Like someone calling her name, Lyra realized what was happening. The quantum core was reaching out to Megan. The hybrid child was resonating with the dimensional anchor. That was why the Nexari wanted her. She was a living key to Earth's greatest weakness. Ivy made a command decision. They would evacuate Megan and all other known hybrids to a secure location. Then they would prepare for the coming assault. Every warrior would be needed. Every dragon, every weapon in their arsenal. Daniel refused. He said Megan was his daughter. He would not be separated from her. Ivy looked ready to argue, but Lyra intervened. She said Daniel was right. Families should not be split, not again. Too many had been torn apart by the last war. If they were going to fight, they would fight together. Ivy accepted this after a long moment. She assigned Lyra's unit to protect the hybrid children. Katie would coordinate intelligence and hunt for the traitors. Daniel would work with the Silvari technicians. His expertise in dimensional stabilization could be crucial. The briefing ended, and warriors dispersed to their assignments. Lyra led Daniel and Megan to quarters where they could rest, but before they could settle in, alarms blared throughout the complex. The dimensional sensors screamed warnings. Multiple large rifts were opening above New Haven. This was not a probe. This was the invasion. And it was starting now. Warriors rushed to battle stations. Dragons took flight. Weapon systems powered up. Lyra grabbed her helmet and looked at Daniel. She told him to keep Megan safe no matter what happened. He nodded. His face set with grim determination. Ember landed beside them and roared a challenge to the sky. The dragon was ready. Lyra mounted up and felt their bond surge with power. Whatever came through those rifts would face the fury of a warrior who had found something worth protecting. The war had come home, and this time it would end decisively. One way or another. The sky above New Haven tore open like fabric ripped by invisible claws. Dimensional rifts blazed with sickly green light. Nexari ships poured through by the dozens, dreadnoughts the size of city blocks, fighters that moved like swarms of angry insects, drop pods that streaked toward the ground, trailing fire. The invasion had begun in earnest. Ember launched from the complex with Lyra mounted on her back. Behind them came 50 other dragon riders, a full wing of Silvari warriors ready for battle. Their armor gleamed in the dying sunlight. Their weapons hummed with charged energy. Commander Ivy led the formation on Shadowfang. Her voice crackled over the combat channel. She gave orders with cold precision. Fighter squadrons would engage the enemy ships. Ground teams would defend key locations. Dragon riders would hit the drop pods before they could deploy troops. It was a good plan, but plans rarely survived contact with the enemy. The first wave of Nexari fighters dove toward them. Plasma. Fire lit up the sky. Ember twisted through the barrage with grace born from centuries of combat. Lyra fired her wrist-mounted energy weapon. Each shot was perfectly aimed. 3 enemy fighters exploded in quick succession. Around them, other dragons engaged in brutal aerial combat. Shadowfang ripped through a formation of fighters with claws and teeth. Another dragon breathed fire that melted armor and sent Nexari ships spiraling down. But the enemy had numbers. For every ship destroyed, 2 more took its place. The human military finally responded. Fighter jets scrambled from nearby bases. Artillery installations opened fire. Missiles streaked upward toward the dreadnoughts. The coordination was messy. 15 years of peace had made humanity's forces rusty, but they were learning fast. Lyra guided Ember toward a cluster of drop pods. They were heading for a residential area. If those pods landed, thousands of civilians would die. She urged Ember faster. The dragon responded. They intercepted the first pod at 5,000 feet. Lyra jumped from Ember's back. She fell through the air and landed on the pod's hull. Her blade cut through the metal like butter. The pod split open and Nexari warriors tumbled out into empty air. They did not have time to scream. Ember caught Lyra as she fell. They moved to the next pod, then the next 5 pods destroyed before they reached ground. But 3 got through. They impacted in the streets below. Hatches blew open and Nexari shock troops poured out. These were not the hunters from the cafe. These were heavy assault units, 9 feet tall, armor like tank plating, weapons that could level buildings. Lyra and Ember dove toward them. The Dragon strafed the troops with fire. Her flames turned pavement to molten glass, but the Nexari armor held. They returned fire with plasma cannons. Ember took a hit to her left wing. The dragon roared in pain but stayed airborne. Lyra felt the injury through their bond. It was not critical, but it hurt. She dropped from Ember and engaged the troops on foot. Her blade work was beautiful and terrible. She moved like water flowing through stone. Each strike found gaps in armor. Each dodge anticipated the enemy attack pattern. She had fought these creatures for decades. She knew their weaknesses, but there were so many of them. Back at the safe house, Daniel watched the battle on holographic displays. His engineering mind cataloged the tactical situation. The Nexari were pushing hard on 3 fronts: the residential areas, the downtown core, and the industrial district near the quantum core's hidden entrance. That last one was the real target. Everything else was a distraction. Megan stood beside him and watched Lyra fight. The girl's eyes glowed with silver light. Daniel noticed and felt a surge of fear. He asked if she was okay. Megan said she could feel the quantum core calling louder now. It wanted her to come. It needed her. A Sylvari technician named Claire approached them. She was young for her kind. Only a few centuries old, her expertise was dimensional mechanics. She had been studying Daniel's research files. She said his work on dimensional stabilization was remarkable. With some modifications, it could be weaponized. They could create an anchor that would trap the Nexari ships in normal space, cut them off from reinforcements, make them vulnerable, but it would require massive power. The kind only found in the quantum core itself. Daniel understood immediately. To save Earth, they needed to use the very thing the Nexari were trying to steal. The risk was enormous. If they miscalculated, the quantum core could destabilize. The entire planet could be torn apart. Claire said they had no choice. Without the weapon, Earth would fall anyway. Better to die trying than surrender. Megan touched Daniel's hand. She said she could help. She could guide them to the quantum core. She could help channel its power safely. Daniel wanted to refuse, wanted to keep his daughter far from danger. But he looked at the displays, at Lyra, fighting impossible odds, at the Nexari ships filling the sky, at the world burning around them. He realized Megan was right. They all had to fight. No one could sit this one out. Katie burst into the operations room. She had been coordinating with human military command. She brought bad news. The traitors in the government had activated sleeper agents. Sabotage was hitting key installations, power grids, communication networks, defense systems, all going offline at critical moments. The invasion was being helped from within. Katie had identified 3 of the main conspirators, all high-ranking officials, all with access to classified information about Earth's defenses. She wanted authorization to arrest them. Ivy gave it without hesitation. She sent Sylvari operatives with Katie to make the arrests. They would deal with traitors later. Right now, stopping the invasion took priority. Outside, the battle intensified. More rifts opened. More ships came through. The Nexari were committing everything to this assault. They wanted Earth's quantum core badly enough to risk their entire invasion fleet. Commander Ivy realized this and changed tactics. She ordered all Dragon Riders to fall back to the safe house. They would make a stand there, protect the hybrid children and the access point to the quantum core, force the Nexari to come to them. Lyra received the order and disengaged from combat. Ember was wounded but still flying. They headed back toward the complex. Behind them, New Haven-burned human and Sylvari forces fought desperate holding actions, buying time for civilians to evacuate. Buying time for Daniel's weapon to be completed. When Lyra landed in the hangar, she was covered in blood. Not all of it was hers. Ember limped to the medical station where technicians began treating her wing. Daniel ran to Lyra. He had watched her fighting on the displays, had seen her nearly die a dozen times. He grabbed her shoulders and asked if she was all right. Lyra nodded. She was tired but uninjured. She had fought through worse. Then she saw Megan standing nearby. The girl's silver glow had intensified. Daniel explained the plan. The weapon they were building, Megan's role in channeling the quantum core. Lyra felt fear grip her heart. Not for herself. She had accepted death long ago. But for this child who reminded her of what she was fighting for, she knelt in front of Megan. She told the girl she was incredibly brave. She said that what they were asking was dangerous, that Megan did not have to do this. Megan smiled. She said she knew, but she wanted to help. She wanted to protect people like Lyra protected her. The girl reached out and hugged Lyra, the warrior who had stood against armies, who had never let herself feel weakness. She hugged the child back and felt something break inside her. All the walls she had built, all the distance she kept from others, it crumbled under the simple trust of a little girl. When they separated, Ember approached. The dragon's wing was bandaged, but she moved steadily. She lowered her head to Megan. The girl and dragon looked at each other. Understanding passed between them. Megan placed her small hand on Ember's snout. This time, the silver light exploded with far more force. It filled the entire hangar. Every hybrid child in the complex began to glow. Not just Megan, but dozens of others. Children whose parents had been Silvari and human. All of them connected through the quantum core. All of them resonating with its power. Lyra realized what was happening. The quantum core was not just calling Megan. It was calling all the hybrids. They were its children in a very real sense, born from the union of two worlds. They were the bridge between dimensional anchor and physical reality. Ivy saw it too. She immediately understood the implications. The Nexari did not just want to capture one hybrid, they wanted to capture all of them. Use their connection to the quantum core to drain its power. That was why the invasion was so massive. They were planning to take every hybrid child on Earth. Claire worked frantically at her console. She was adapting Daniel's designs, incorporating the new information about the hybrids. She said they could use the connection, turn it into a weapon, but someone needed to be the primary conduit. Someone who could handle the raw dimensional energy. It would likely be fatal to a normal human, or Silvari. The energy would burn through them in seconds. Lyra knew what she had to do. She and Ember could survive it. Their bond made them more resistant to dimensional forces, but it would likely destroy their connection permanently. Burn out the link that had existed for centuries, Ember would survive but revert to a wild state. Lyra would lose her partner, her other half. The price of victory. Daniel saw her expression and understood. He stepped forward, he said no, he said he would be the conduit. He was Megan's father. His job was to protect her, not let others sacrifice for her. Lyra argued, but Daniel was firm. He said he had lived a good life. He had seen war and peace. He had loved and been loved. If this was his time, then so be it. Before they could continue arguing, the alarms blared again. Nexari ground forces had reached the complex heavy assault units, siege weapons, atmospheric fighters. The final battle was beginning, and they were out of time. Ivy ordered all warriors to defensive positions. The hybrid children were moved to the secure vault deep underground. Daniel, Claire, and Megan went with them to prepare the quantum core connection. Lyra mounted Ember despite the dragon's injuries. They took position at the main gate with the other dragon riders. Commander Ivy rode beside them on Shadowfang. The obsidian dragon snarled at the approaching enemy. Ivy looked at Lyra. She said this might be their last stand. They had fought together for 300 years, through countless battles against impossible odds. If this was the end, then it was an honor to face it together. Lyra nodded. She said the same. Then the Nexari army crashed against their defenses, and the world became fire and blood and fury. Dawn broke over a battlefield that had once been a city. The Nexari assault was relentless and brutal. Their heavy units advanced behind portable shields. Plasma cannons hammered at the complex defenses. Buildings collapsed into rubble streets, became rivers of molten metal. Lyra and Ember fought at the front line with desperate fury. The dragon was already wounded but refused to yield. She breathed fire until her throat bled. She tore through enemy armor with claws that had dulled from constant combat. Lyra remained mounted and directed their attacks with tactical precision. They had to hold. Just a little longer. Just until Daniel completed the weapon. Around them, other dragons fell. Brave warriors who gave everything. Their riders died with them, bound until the very end. Commander. Ivy and Shadowfang anchored the left flank. The obsidian dragon was a nightmare made real faster and deadlier than any Nexari weapon. Ivy's blade flashed silver in the smoke. Each swing dropped an enemy. But even she was tiring. The battle had raged for 6 hours without pause. Human military forces arrived as reinforcements, tanks and artillery infantry units with plasma rifles salvaged from the last war. They were not as skilled as Sylvari warriors, but they were determined. This was their world, their home. They would not surrender it. Katie coordinated the defense from the operations room. She juggled a dozen communication channels, directed fire support, called in airstrikes, managed the evacuation of wounded. She had also been tracking the traitors. 3 of them were in custody now. The arrests had caused chaos in the government. But it also shut down the sabotage. Systems came back online. Power grids stabilized. Communication networks reopened. The humans were finally fighting at full strength. Deep underground, Daniel worked with Claire at the quantum core chamber. The core itself was massive, a sphere of crystallized dimensional energy, 10 meters across, pulsing with blue-white light. It hummed with power that made the air vibrate. Megan stood before it with her eyes closed. She had entered a trance state, her consciousness touching the core's vast awareness. She was learning to communicate with it, to understand its nature. Claire configured the dimensional anchor device. It looked like a ring of metal studded with quantum processors. Daniel checked the calculations for the 3rd time. The margins were razor thin. If they channeled too little, the weapon would fail. If they channeled too much, the core could fracture, Earth would be destroyed. They had to get it exactly right. Megan opened her eyes. They glowed pure silver. She spoke, but her voice carried harmonics, multiple tones overlapping, the quantum core speaking through her. It said it understood what they needed. It would provide the power, but the conduit would suffer. The energy was too vast for mortal flesh. Daniel had accepted this. He stepped toward the anchor device, but Megan grabbed his hand. She said there was another way. If all the hybrid children joined together, they could share the burden. Distribute the energy across dozens of conduits instead of one. No single person would die, but they would all be changed. Connected permanently to the quantum core, linked to each other forever. Daniel looked at his daughter. He wanted to refuse. Wanted to protect her from this transformation. But he saw the determination in her eyes. She had already made her choice. Claire said they were running out of time. The Nexari had breached the outer defenses. They were fighting in the complex corridors now. Minutes away from reaching the vault, Daniel made his decision. He called for all the hybrid children to be brought to the chamber. 43 of them, ages ranging from infants to teenagers, all carrying both human and Sylvari blood, all connected to Earth's quantum core through their very existence. They gathered in a circle around the anchor device. Megan took her place at the center. She reached out and took the hands of the children beside her. They linked together, a chain of small hands and shared destiny. The quantum core pulsed brighter. It recognized its children. Claire activated the device. Energy began to flow, above ground. The battle reached its climax. The Nexari had deployed their siege weapons, massive cannons that could crack open bunkers. They were preparing to breach the vault door. Lyra and Ember stood in their path. The dragon was covered in wounds. Her wings were shredded. She could barely stand, but she would not move, would not let the enemy pass. Ivy fought beside them. Shadowfang had taken plasma bolts meant for younger dragons. The obsidian beast was bleeding from a dozen places. Still, they held the line. A Nexari commander approached, larger than the others. Armor covered in trophies from conquered worlds. It spoke in a voice that crackled with alien harmonics. It offered surrender. Said the Silvery had fought well, but the battle was lost. Earth would fall. The quantum core would be harvested. Resistance was futile. Lyra spat blood and raised her blade. She told the commander exactly what it could do with its offer. The words were not polite. The Nexari commander laughed. It raised its massive weapon aimed at Lyra. This was the end. She knew it. Ember knew it. They looked at each other one last time, shared a moment of perfect understanding, no regrets. They had lived fully, loved completely, fought for something worth defending. If this was their final stand, then so be it. The commander fired. The shot never landed. A wall of silver light exploded from beneath their feet. It rose like a tidal wave, swept across the battlefield. The dimensional anchor had activated. Every Nexari ship in the sky froze. Their dimensional drives shut down instantly. They hung motionless, trapped in normal space, unable to retreat, unable to call reinforcements. Sitting targets, human and silvery forces did not waste the opportunity. Missiles and energy weapons tore into the helpless ships. One by one, the dreadnoughts fell, crashed into the city below. The Nexari ground forces felt the shift. Their support was gone, their advantage eliminated. Panic rippled through their ranks. Lyra did not give them time to recover. She urged Ember forward. The wounded dragon found new strength. They charged into the enemy formation. Other warriors followed. The tide had turned. What had been a desperate defense became a rout. The Nexari broke and ran, but there was nowhere to go. The dimensional rifts were sealed. No escape, no mercy. The battle ended in the ruins of New Haven. Surviving Nexari forces surrendered or died. Human soldiers moved through the wreckage, searching for survivors, treating the wounded. Silveri warriors collapsed where they stood. Exhausted beyond measure, Lyra dismounted from Ember. Her legs nearly gave out. The dragon lowered herself to the ground. Finally, allowing her injuries to show, medical teams swarmed them both. Ivy approached on foot. Shadowfang had been taken to emergency treatment. The commander herself looked ready to collapse. She told Lyra they had won. Earth was saved. The Nexari invasion crushed. Lyra nodded, but her thoughts were underground with Daniel and Megan. She needed to know if they survived. She limped toward the vault entrance, descending through shattered corridors, past blast marks and fallen warriors. The vault door stood open. She entered the quantum core chamber. What she saw made her stop. The hybrid children stood in their circle, all of them glowing with silver light. Alive, changed, but alive. Megan saw Lyra and broke formation. She ran to the warrior. Lyra caught her in a fierce embrace. The girl was warm, solid. Real Daniel stood by the anchor device with Claire. He was alive as well, but Lyra could see the change in him. His eyes carried the same silver glow as Megan. He had been too close to the energy flow. It had affected him. Despite not being the primary conduit, he was connected to the quantum core now. To the hybrid children. Part of their network. He walked to Lyra. Neither spoke. They just looked at each other. Two warriors who had survived impossible odds, who had found something worth fighting for. Daniel broke the silence. He said he owed her a proper date. No interruptions this time. Lyra laughed. It hurt her ribs, but she could not stop. The absurdity of it all. The horror and beauty and madness. They had gone from strangers to soldiers to something more. All in less than 24 hours, Megan hugged them both. Creating a small circle of warmth in the cold chamber, Katie appeared at the entrance. She had the traitors in custody. their conspiracy exposed. The Nexari collaborators would face justice. But more importantly, she had news. The Silvari Council had made contact. They were sending reinforcements. No more hiding, no more living in shadows. The age of integration was beginning Earth, and the Silvari would stand together openly. Lyra felt something she had not experienced in 15 years. Hope, real hope for a future beyond war. She looked at Daniel and Megan, at Katie and Claire, at Ember resting nearby, at all the survivors who had given everything. They had paid a terrible price, but they had won. And now they could build something new, something better. The war was over, for real this time. 3 months after the battle, Earth began to heal. New Haven was being rebuilt. Humans and Silvari worked side by side. Construction crews cleared rubble during the day. At night, the hybrid children used their connection to the quantum core to help stabilize damaged buildings. It was slow work, but it was honest work. Lyra stood on a balcony overlooking the reconstruction. Ember rested beside her. The dragon had recovered from her wounds. Her wing had been repaired by Silvari biotechnology. She would never be quite as fast as before, but she could fly. That was enough. Daniel joined Lyra on the balcony. He carried 2 cups of coffee. Real coffee. Not the synthetic stuff from the war years. They had grown comfortable in each other's presence. The awkwardness of their first meeting seemed like a lifetime ago. Daniel looked different now. His eyes still carried that silver glow. The connection to the quantum core had changed him permanently. He could sense dimensional rifts before they formed, could feel the subtle currents of reality itself. It unnerved him at first, but he was learning to accept his new nature. Megan ran onto the balcony full of energy. She had just finished classes at the new academy, the Human Silvari Integration Institute, where hybrid children learned to control their abilities, where humans studied dimensional mechanics, where Silvari learned about Earth culture and history. The girl was thriving. She had friends now, both human and Silvari. She was learning to properly bond with dragons under Ember's guidance. Eventually, she would have her own partner. But that was years away. For now, she was content being a child. Katie arrived shortly after she had been promoted to director of the new Security Council. Her job was to coordinate Earth defenses, hunt remaining Nexari agents, and root out any future conspiracies. The trials of the traitors had concluded last week. Justice had been served. Some were imprisoned, others executed for their crimes. The government had been restructured, new safeguards put in place, transparency and accountability, hard lessons learned through blood and sacrifice. Commander Ivy visited that evening. Shadowfang had fully recovered. The Obsidian Dragon was as fearsome as ever. Ivy brought news from the Silvari Council. The formal alliance had been ratified. Earth was now part of the Dimensional Guardian. Alliance protected and protecting. It meant trade and technology exchange. It meant Silvari would immigrate openly to Earth. It meant humanity would help defend other worlds, threatened by the Nexari Empire. The war was not over. Not really. The Nexari were vast and patient. This had been just one battle in a conflict that spanned dimensions, but Earth was no longer alone, no longer helpless. Claire had continued developing dimensional technology with Daniel. Together they created new weapons, new defenses, new ways to detect and seal rifts. Their work was saving lives, preventing invasions before they could begin. The quantum core had been secured, its location still classified, but now it was properly guarded, both by technology and by the hybrid children who served as its natural defenders. Megan and the others took their role. Seriously, they trained constantly, practiced channeling energy, learned combat and diplomacy. They would be the next generation of guardians. Lyra watched them during their exercises. She saw herself in their determination, their willingness to sacrifice for others. But she also saw hope. These children had not been broken by war. They had been shaped by it, but not destroyed. They laughed and played and dreamed. They were allowed to be young, something Lyra never had. She was grateful for that. Daniel asked Lyra a question that evening. He had been building up courage for weeks. He asked if she would consider staying, not just on Earth, but with him and Megan. As a family, Lyra was silent for a long moment. She had spent centuries as a warrior, never staying in one place, never forming attachments beyond her bond with Ember. The idea of a permanent home terrified her, but it also called to something deep inside, a longing she had never acknowledged. She looked at Daniel, at this man who had survived war and loss, who had accepted the impossible, who looked at her not as a weapon but as a person. She looked at Megan, at this bright girl who saw past her armor, who trusted her completely, who had saved the world by believing in others. She looked at Ember. The dragon rumbled her approval. After 300 years together, they knew each other perfectly. Ember wanted this. Wanted her rider to finally rest, to know peace, to experience the life they had always protected, but never claimed. Lyra gave her answer. It was a simple word. Yes. Megan cheered and threw her arms around Lyra. Daniel smiled, that rare, genuine smile that transformed his weathered face. Katie raised her coffee cup in a toast. Ivy inclined her head with approval. It was a small moment, barely worth noting in the grand scheme of galactic conflicts, but it mattered. These small moments were what they had been fighting for all along. The right to choose, the freedom to love, the chance to build something lasting. 6 months later, Daniel and Lyra made it official. A small ceremony in the rebuilt park, Megan served as ring-bearer. Ember and Shadowfang stood as witnesses. Human and Silvari traditions blended seamlessly. Katie officiated with her usual efficiency. The guest list was small. Close friends and fellow warriors. People who had bled together. Who understood the weight of survival. No grand celebration. Just quiet acknowledgement of commitment. After the ceremony, they went home to the house they had been building together, part human, architecture, part Silvari design, with a reinforced garden for Ember. The dragon had her own space, but preferred to sleep near her rider. Some bonds could never be truly separate. Life settled into routine. Daniel worked on dimensional technology. Lyra trained the next generation of warriors. Megan attended academy and practiced with young dragons. They had dinner together every evening, shared stories about their days, made plans for the future. It was ordinary, wonderfully ordinary. But Lyra remained vigilant, her warrior instincts never fully quieted. She still checked the dimensional sensors every morning, still kept her weapons maintained, still slept light enough to wake at the first sign of danger. Daniel understood he did the same. They were soldiers trying to be civilians. It would take time, maybe forever. 1 year after the invasion, Megan graduated to advanced training. She was 13 now. Tall for her age, confident but not arrogant. She had bonded with a young dragon named Storm, a silver-scaled female with Ember's courage. The graduation ceremony was held at the academy. Hundreds of students, both hybrid and human, all learning to defend Earth, to stand together against threats. Lyra watched with pride. Her daughter, not by blood, but by choice, by shared battles and quiet moments, by the bonds forged through fire. Daniel squeezed her hand. They had built this, a family, a future, something worth protecting. That night, Lyra stood on their balcony again, Ember beside her as always. The city lights sparkled below. Ships moved through the sky, both human and Silvari designs, working in harmony. Daniel joined her. He pointed to the northern sky, where stars shone brightly. He told her his sensors had picked up something, faint signatures far beyond Earth. The Nexari were still out there, watching, waiting. Planning their next move, Lyra nodded. She had expected this war's never truly ended. They just paused between rounds, but this time Earth would be ready. This time they had warning. This time they had unity. Daniel asked if she was worried. Lyra considered the question. She looked at their home, at Megan sleeping inside, at Ember resting peacefully, at the city they had fought to save. She said no. She was not worried. They had survived the impossible. They had built something beautiful from ashes. Whatever came next, they would face together. Daniel smiled. He said he loved her. Simple words, but they carried weight. Lyra had heard oaths and battle cries, had been praised by commanders and kings. But these 3 words meant more than all of that. She told him she loved him too. It was still strange to say, after centuries of emotional distance, but it felt right. True. Megan appeared in the doorway. She asked if everything was okay. Lyra turned and smiled. She said everything was perfect. They went inside together. The family that war had forged. The warriors who had found peace. The bridge between 2 worlds. Outside Ember watched over them, her crimson scales gleaming in the moonlight. The ancient dragon who had fought countless battles, who had saved her rider time and again. She was content. Her warrior had finally found home. Storm flew up to join her, the young silver dragon learning from her elder. 2 generations, 2 bonds, connected by love and duty. In the distance, the stars shone on, indifferent to mortal struggles. The Nexari Empire plotted in the darkness. Other threats lurked between dimensions. The universe was vast and dangerous, but on Earth, in one small house, a family slept peacefully, protected by dragons and determination, defended by warriors who had chosen love over endless battle. And that, more than any weapon or army, was what made humanity worth defending. The ability to hope, to build, to love. Despite the darkness, that was the true strength. The real victory, not in defeating enemies, but in creating something worth protecting. Lyra dreamed that night, not of war or death, but of Megan growing up, of training sessions and graduations, of grandchildren she might one day have, of a future that stretched beyond the next battle. She dreamed of peace. Real, lasting peace. It was a good dream. When she woke, Daniel was beside her. Megan was safe in her room. Ember watched from the garden. The quantum core hummed far below, stable and secure. The hybrid children stood guard. Earth spun through space, protected and strong. The dawn broke over New Haven. Another day. Beginning. Another chance to build, to love, to live. The war was over. The new dawn had come, and they would face it together. Whatever storms might gather on the horizon, whatever threats might emerge from the dark, they were ready, not just to survive, but to thrive, to create a world where warriors could finally rest, where children could grow without fear, where 2 species could become one family. That was their victory. That was their legacy. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.